So, love God, love your neighbor, make disciples. These are what Christians are about. What we're about in the church, what we're about in the home, what we're about at the shopping market, what we're about at work. Now, how do those things apply to work? If the right thing is about doing the will of God, then the right thing will never interfere with a Christian's fulfillment of God's commands. If so, then nothing that contradicts the Great Commandment and or the Great Commission is in God's will for us to do. Now, if you know anything about like logic and stuff, this is a negative test, though. This won't tell us the right thing to do. This will only tell us what not to do. Certain jobs are not consistent with loving God or loving others. Loan shark probably would be a good example of that. Other ones, you can think of, most of these are, maybe even crimes. Certain jobs might not be good with the Great Commission. Jobs that require you to spend more time thinking about the job than you're thinking about people, thinking about others. Although some of our jobs are the perfect example of how to get into others' lives in a relational way. So, but if something at work, if something violates one of those two things, loving God, loving others, if there's something you do that you're not sure you can love God while doing it, that's a good sign that it's not what you should be doing as a Christian at work. This is for free. I did mean things to little animals. Pharmaceutical testing. Now, I'm okay with testing for novel stuff. Some of the stuff I did at the university, we were trying to come up with brand new ways to treat HIV/AIDS. That could, if we were successful, that could lead to the reduction of suffering for many, many people. And we tried to limit the amount of critter pain as much as possible. It was very humane. Some of the stuff I did in the pharmaceutical lab, I had trouble with because the results of it was dropping the price of the drug a couple cents so that the investors in the company would get more profit. And the numbers and the facts and things like that, it's just really, there was an issue there that I couldn't see that as loving God's creation. And it bothered me. I ended up having nightmares and dreams and just something about Steve Irwin and baby hippopotami that led me to leave that job. But it's this idea of, does this job violate what I'm supposed to be about as a Christian? Is a negative context. But as we look at, okay, so we can figure out sometimes pretty easily, sometimes not so easily, but can figure out what not to do. But what should we do? I believe prayer to the Father is the key for accessing and determining God's will. Jesus in the Lord's Prayer during the Sermon on the Mount directly identifies the will of God as something we should be praying about. Therefore, you should pray like this: Our Father in heaven, your name be honored and as holy. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We should pray for God's will to be done. Then Philippians 4:6 adds that we should pray in every situation. Do not worry about anything, but in everything, through prayer and petition with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. If we need to know the right thing to do at work, then praying for God's will to be done is the best place to start. Have you ever prayed for God's will to be done through you at your job? Have you ever prayed for God's will to be done through your co-workers at your job? Have you ever prayed for God's will to be done through your company? Now, I started thinking about this stuff, even if the company is a completely secular company. Like actually seeing what they're about and seeing if God's will can be done through that company. If we look back in Scripture, we see cases of God using even unholy empires to accomplish His will. If He can use the Assyrian Empire to accomplish His will, He can use Drexel University or some other entity as well. Then I also looked at the prayer of Jabez, which is a very obscure passage that has gotten a lot more attention recently than I ever expected, and probably wouldn't have even noticed it if it hadn't gotten so much attention. But in Chronicles 4, 9 through 10, it says, Jabez was more honorable than his brothers. His mother named him Jabez and said, I gave birth to him in pain. Jabez called out to God of Israel. He prays, if you will only bless me, extend my border, let your hand be with me and keep me from harm, so that I will not cause any pain. And God granted his request. I want to concentrate on that phrase, extend my border. In an agrarian culture, in farming, I'm going to assume Jabez was a farmer at that time because pretty much that's what everybody did at that time. Land was the key to success. The more land you had, the more crops you could grow, the more herds you could tend. So Jabez actually asked God to grant him more land, extend his borders, which actually is a petition to be successful, or more successful, or to have more opportunity to be successful in his occupation, which is some sort of farming. Now, Jabez asked God for occupational success, and God granted it. God gave it to him. God said, yeah, sure. Nothing about Jabez's prayer to extend his border was against the will of God. Something about growing stuff, farming, things like that, we think that is a secular thing. We think that is just a job. And there are ways to do it well. There are ways to do it within God's parameters. There's tons of ways to do it with outside God's parameters. But we just think it's this neutral thing. And God blessed Jabez with success in that. Extended his border, allowed him to grow more, allowed him more area to tend in some way or another. Have you ever, in your job, prayed to God, asked God if it was His will for you to be successful at your job? Have you ever prayed for your coworkers to be successful? For your company to be successful? And I'm going to illustrate this with a totally imaginary, fictitious company that is not at all based on any other imaginary or fictitious company. In our hypothetical situation, you work at a paper company based in Wilkes-Barre. Now, would this job prevent you from loving God or loving others? Now, you're selling paper. You're a person who's supposed to be selling paper for this company in Wilkes-Barre. Now, not necessarily. There may be some situational things at the job that could prevent you from loving others. For example, if your boss is an atrocious moron, you may have trouble loving others as God commands you. This may mean you need to change jobs or grow in your ability to love those even who aren't easily loved. But the selling of the paper, the actual job, the actual employment, has no reason to prevent you from loving God or loving others. Could it prevent you from fulfilling the Great Commission? Again, not necessarily. There may be some situational things about time, about schedule, about stuff that might need to change or things, but you could actually, if you're working at a company selling paper, you know people that you wouldn't know other ways. You might be able to develop meaningful relationships And it's really hard to make disciples if you don't know anybody. It's just, I found knowing people, knowing more people, knowing a lot of people, being where people are, helps you find people that you might be able to make disciples of. So it might even help you fulfill the Great Commission. Now, either co-workers or even clients. Now this, let's just say this paper company in Wilkes-Barre, then let's just make up a name, let's call it Thunder Tiflin Incorporated. And this is its mission statement, okay? Provides its customers quality office and informational technology products, furniture, printing values, and the expertise required for making informed buying decisions. We provide our products and services with a dedication to the highest degree of integrity and quality of customer satisfaction, developing long-term professional relationships with employees that develop pride, creating a stable work environment and company spirit.